at this moment that I'd like to invite Dr. Barbara Crawford to come to the mic and give a vote of thanks.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, fellows, one thing to learn if you ever are elected to be President of the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland is don't nominate anyone to be a future Rhind lecturer. Because as sure as things can be, you will find yourself 3 years later standing where I'm standing now, having been asked to say a few words of thanks and appreciation of what one has just heard. But of course this duty is a pleasant one as well as a serious responsibility. You've nominated that person because of his, more rarely her, standing or reputation in a field of archaeology, ethnology, or as we have heard, as was said by the founder of the series of lectures, an allied topic which will assist in the general advancement of knowledge. And I will say again, as I have said in remarking on the experience of hearing the lectures expounded by our Rhind lecturers many years, particularly in the last 3 years when I had to attend all of them, that this is a most valuable and rewarding process of learning about societies and cultures which may not be familiar or indeed known to an individual at all. And the Rhind lectures offer a rare opportunity to those who may be out with the educational sphere, as well as those within it, to benefit from such a learning process in a short space of time over a packed weekend. Although I think I remember a time when they were given on 6 separate days, but we changed that and it's now a packed weekend. And this year's 2012 Rhind lectures, the 133rd Rhind lecturer, Professor Kevin Edwards, has continued this tradition in a most spectacular fashion. And I will say at the beginning of my appreciation, Kevin, that your PowerPoint illustrations have been more than spectacular. If one were to judge on visual achievements alone, then the illuminating displays we have been treated to would win any PowerPoint contest, hands down. Those of us who have struggled and do struggle with PowerPoint presentations know just how much effort and skill has to go into making an enlivening and technically competent presentation. I do not think that your elevated level of technical competence can really make it that much easier, even with the whizziest of computers, graphic programs and boundless research funding, because you inserted into your graphs and your diagrams and your maps some highly interesting historical material. Well, I'm not contrasting it with the uninteresting graphs, but the historical value of gathering that together, I know personally, can take a lot of time and a persistent pursuing of connections with archival resources. So I just have a brief glimpse of the amount of work that has gone into that aspect of it, as well as all the other aspects of your PowerPoint presentation. But more than anything else, your illustrative material helped to make your scientific evidence comprehensible to those of us who do not have the required understanding of much of the environmental research. Because there's no doubt that science is leading the way in environmental archaeology as in other branches of archaeological research. Most of us struggle to be polymaths, or pretend to be polymaths, in this brave new world of science and archaeology. I had also noticed Elsa Rosedal's comment that you quoted when you showed that nice picture of her, when she talked about the multidisciplinary nature requirements in Viking studies in recent decades. You are the scientist, but you have had to incorporate evidence of very different kinds in your North Atlantic research program. Perhaps you had to struggle with that too, the historical, philological and literary evidence on which Viking studies have been primarily based. But of course there's the topographic, there's the toponymic evidence, there's the folklore, there's the modern history of these island communities, and of course the political sensibilities which make this an area where angels fear to tread, including an enormous amount of previous research carried out by local archaeologists and environmentalists published in local languages, whether Icelandic, Faroese, Norwegian, Danish or Swedish, and perhaps Inuit as well. and I know all about the challenges that these present to those of us who try to break into the Scandinavian world, and you seem to have done it superbly. I'm sure with a lot of help from friends and colleagues, but it has apparently been done. So you give the impression of having effortlessly assimilated all these aspects in your focus on the settlement and ecology of these Norse communities in the North Atlantic. And you are pretty good with your pronunciation of local place names too, like Aya, Fjella, Batten, Jökull, which foxed all the radio and TV newscasters, of course, when the eruption occurred. We all know about the Vikings, but I think we now appreciate how little we knew about the Vikings. For what you have done is to show that there was a great deal more to these hardy pioneers than any of us really appreciated. Your research team has taken us beyond the Vikings and into the world they created in the North Atlantic. This is the world of the saga stories, but the sagas were written to entertain, and that didn't include the details of their everyday life, like digging the ditches or the peat ash pits. As you said, there's no mention of volcanic eruptions in the sagas, although of course they are well recorded in the Icelandic annals. Your research program takes us into the wider landscape and away from the settlements, and your results are showing not only the impact of the Norse settlers on the landscape, but also the bigger environmental problems of these fringe oceanic areas. And one is rather relieved to hear that the land degradation was ongoing long before the Viking Age, and also that the settlers did make efforts to preserve the woodland and manage the coppicing of trees for charcoal. We have been privileged to be given not a glimpse, but a superb picture, and a picture is the operative word for your wonderful PowerPoint display, of the environmental research program which you've been leading for the past 10 years. If I were honest, which of course I am, I would have to tell you that Kevin and I have never been totally enthusiastic about environmental archaeology. All those lice and parasites and fleas and bugs and the pervasive stench of the urine in the Viking homestead, which was being stored in the vats for use in cloth preparation and everything else, which of course Sally Magnuson tells us all about in her recently written book, The History of Pee. Have you read it?
No.
It's well worth reading. But your enthralling demonstration of the wider picture of the wonderful rolling landscapes, the lowering mountains, and the natural forces of northern ocean, northern climate in a northern world, so very close to our own, has given us a totally new outlook. It's given me a totally new outlook on environmental archaeology. And I'm sure I can speak on behalf of all of us who have attended this feast of research discoveries and analysis when I express the Society's thanks for your Rhind lectures and our congratulations on leading such a challenging and exciting programme of research, which will eventually put Viking studies onto a new plane, and which is already doing so. We give you our very best wishes for the further development and eventual conclusion of this successful research project, which we've been privileged to share. And thank you for imparting, as you said in this last lecture, some of the excitement, a lot of the excitement of learning about these lost communities, well, in Greenland, of course, and in Newfoundland, the lost communities of the Viking world. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you very much indeed, Barbara, for that very fitting tribute. And I think there's only one further thing I can add to that, to this Kentish man, is to thank him very much for being an absolutely easy speaker to deal with in terms of keeping to time so very strictly during the course of these 3 days, which has been, from my point of view, very, very helpful. I've just got a few closing remarks. One is to say that the bookstall outside will remain open for another 15 minutes as we go out, and to remind those of you who've reserved books to please pick them up before you leave. And thinking about the book stand reminds me to thank on your behalf all of the Society's staff and their helpers who've ensured the very smooth running of this Rhind lecture series over the course of the last 3 days. I think their contribution is essential to making these things work, and perhaps you could give them a hand.